Look, the horrors of war and the imperfect choices presented to political leaders could hardly be more obvious to us now as we consider the conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine, and we worry about the muscular posturing across the Taiwan Strait. Esteemed American foreign correspondent and author Robert D. Kaplan's latest book, The Tragic Mind, delves into classic literature and philosophy to discuss difficult choices in statecraft and, I guess, the absence of ideal outcomes. He joins me now. Welcome to the program, Robert. Great to meet you.
It's a pleasure to be here, Chris.
Look, I find it fascinating looking at your book and talking about, and you talk about how you can know your geography and your borders and your politics, if you like, but in the end it comes back to age-old choices and philosophy of leader. And what those leaders do that are making these choices, and we're seeing this play out right now, aren't we? With leaders like the mullahs in Iran and Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel.
Yeah, it's all about geography until it becomes all about Shakespeare.
Yes,
and that's really what it's about. That geography, geopolitics sets the stage, the framework. But on the stage are human beings who cannot be reduced to test tubes in a chemical experiment.
And you talk about how it's not as clear and obvious as choices between good and evil that people like to set out. And that's very easy to understand when you talk about a situation like Ukraine, for instance, where there's been geopolitics in that area for generations, and you have to worry about nationalism and NATO's role. But surely with what we're seeing in Israel at the moment, it is existential for Israel. They have to hit back at a number of enemies, probably all financed and encouraged by Iran, but a number of enemies essentially just trying to kill its people.
Yes, Iran for decades has practiced forward defense, meaning nobody will attack us because we will fight from Hezbollah in Lebanon, we'll fight from Hamas in Gaza, we'll fight from the Houthis in Yemen. But what Israel is doing is it's methodically destroying Iran's forward defense and taking the fight directly to Iran. And I would say this is going to go back and forth indefinitely until, and I'm not being apocalyptic here, until there is regime change in Iran, which will come not by any invasion or anything like that, but Iran, as another Washington analyst once said, is like a country ruled by a narrow clique of North Koreans in a country of South Koreans. And it's just tremendously unpopular regime there.
Yeah, and most of those large Sunni nations in the Arab world would want that to happen too, the Saudi Arabia prime among them.
Yeah, because the Saudis actually had good relationships with the Shah of Iran when the Shah was in power, because the Shah was secular, so the Sunni-Shiite split was not as pronounced when Iran had a secular trending regime. But when the mullahs took over, when it became an Islamic Shiite clerisy, then you had this split between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Two big questions I want to try and get your pithy answers on. One is then what happens now with Ukraine? Does that become a stalemate for the foreseeable future, or does the West do enough to help Vladimir Zelensky reclaim his country?
I think what's going to happen, no matter who wins in the U.S. election, there's going to be a move towards negotiations sometime in 2025. Because every month that the Ukraine war goes on, even though the Russians have the upper hand at the moment, it is nevertheless weakening the Russian Empire across the Caucasus, Central Asia, Siberia, the Russian Far East. Russia does not have the capacity to continue this war indefinitely, and the Ukrainians, of course, don't either.
Well, you mentioned the election. This was my final question. Then when you talk about the power of the personality, the individual in these great moments in history, who will be a stronger and better leader, I suppose, a more stable leader for the free world, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump?
The way you posed the question, it would seem like it would be Trump because he's strong, but actually it would be Harris. because she will run a methodical administration stacked to the gills with the most qualified assistant secretaries, deputy assistant secretaries, secretaries, because America is like an imperial power, and it runs through a foreign policy bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy, though it's been belittled and being called a deep state, is actually quite impressive. It's actually quite professional.
So under Trump, things are far more volatile.
And far less professional, and where there'll be far less follow-through at the lower levels.
Great to talk to you, Robert.